Hello and welcome to Legalese. I'm Ernie Hyde, your host. My office is in Shirley. And as you know, this show is brought to you by the Northern Middlesex Bar Association on a monthly basis. Today I have with me the new president of the Northern Middlesex Bar Association, Brian E. Burke. And Brian has come to help us out with school suspensions, which one of those topics, especially today, that seems to be in the news quite a bit for all kinds of different reasons. And Brian, welcome. Brian's been with us a few times before, and now that he's the president, we'll get him on more often, along with his other duties. So Brian, let's start off with, what's the basis, or where does someone find out about what suspensions are with the school, what can cause a suspension, or worse? Where do they find this information out typically?
And the school handbook is the best place to go. Every year they'll have the handbooks available for the children and the students, as well as the parents. And a lot of schools have them online as well. And you can gain access to the handbooks online so that the parents can have a readily available source of information if something happens. And then just conversations with the faculty and administrators. They give you an idea of what type of behavior is expected and not in the classrooms at the beginning of the year. So the handbook is the first place that you should go.
Okay. So let's assume that a child gets involved with some sort of incident, and I'm sure you can give us many examples of that, but what's the first thing a parent should do? Now, I know parents, when they get a call from the school, either the principal, assistant principal, even the superintendent's office at times, yes, they begin to panic, want to grab their child and drag them into school and get to the bottom of this and so on and so forth. What's your recommendation that they do?
The first thing they should do is have a conversation with their child as to what occurred. Were they a principal actor in a particular incident that occurred, or were they a peripheral participant, or were they just observing something going on? And then if it appears that the child was an actor in a particular incident, the first inclination parents usually have is, we're going to make this a teaching experience, we're going to go in there, we're going to make our child tell the truth. And that's probably the worst thing that you can do if your child's been involved in a fight where there's some serious injuries, because schools will tend to now call the police right away. Everybody is very sensitive about the issues of bullying that are going on these days, especially with the terrible tragedy that happened in Newtown, Connecticut. So the parent should talk with their children, make sure that there's no legal ramifications of their behavior in the school. If there is, and they bring their child in, they're going to face some serious problems if their children starts to admit to being in a fight or starting a fight or hurting somebody in the school. And that's going to make it very difficult for people like you and I who defend these children in a criminal court when they're out already admitting to being involved in an incident and being an actor in it. So the parents really have to pay attention to that. It's admirable that the parents want to make this a learning experience for their children, yeah, and they want to get down to it and make sure that their children, suffer the consequences of their actions. But today it's different. It's not just a school disciplinary action. Today the schools have police officers that are assigned to the schools that'll start an investigation oftentimes before a parent is even notified. And they may be calling in the child into a room, an interview room, but really what's happening is these children are being interrogated as far as their involvement in an incident. Mm-hmm. And so right at that point, your child should pay attention to what's going on. I know that they don't have you know, the deep education and everything you need, but their Fifth Amendment rights kick in right then and there. And that's an opportunity for them to say, I'd like to speak with my parents first. And hopefully the parents will be watching a show like this and understanding that the next thing they should do is be speaking with an attorney if their children have been involved in anything.
Yeah, and that's the important point. Even children have constitutional rights and should exercise them whenever they have the opportunity to, until they've had an opportunity to seek advice. And in this case, going into the school with an uneducated, in terms of legal education, parent to address issues that they can't really address anyway.
Yes.
And kids say the funniest things. I'm sure you've heard that before. And they do, and they like to admit to things that they didn't even do. So once they admit, it's on the record.
It's on the record. And the other thing is, it's important to note that a parent can waive a child's constitutional rights.
Right.
So the parent, when they're thinking they're doing the right thing, are actually doing the wrong thing for their child. Especially if you have certain incidents of assault and battery. Today, it's been my experience that the police who are assigned to these schools now are extremely sensitive to what's going on. So if you're involved in a pushing and shoving incident in the school, and you push somebody into a pole, or you push them into a wall, I've seen individuals, or if you knock them down and you push their head down to the ground, I've seen people charged with not just assault and battery, but assault and battery, dangerous weapon, a pole, a wall, and the ground. That's how sensitive they are. And all of a sudden, a simple assault and battery, which can be treated like a misdemeanor, is now a felony.
Felony, right.
And there's a serious consequence between being charged with a felony versus a misdemeanor when it comes to suspensions. If your child is charged with a felony inside the school or outside the school, they immediately get suspended. If it's outside the school, they get suspended if it's not even a school activity, anything like that. If it's a misdemeanor, the school has more discretion to do a suspension, but if it's a felony, you are out until the conclusion of the felonies heard at district court or superior court. Now, it may be a juvenile being charged with felony delinquency, or someone who's of age who's being charged with a felony. And then there's a whole host of problems that transcend that issue of being charged with a felony.
When an investigation is taking place, it could be taking place by school personnel or by a police officer. What do you recommend be said at that point? Now, if parents follow the advice you gave, you first talk to your child and figure out, if you can, what their involvement in this particular incident was. If they were a participant, should they even be talking to the police?
No.
Okay. And what about to the school personnel?
And the same thing to the school personnel.
Okay. The fact of the matter is, it almost doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all.
Yeah. I mean, once you put it out there, it's out there.
And it's hard. You can't take it back once it's out there.
Right.
And it ends up in a police report or some type of other report with the school
document or whatever.
School document.
Yep.
And it's very difficult to take back the words once you say them, especially when you're fulfilling an element of a crime that you're going to be charged for. These assault and batteries and the bullying that you hear about and read about in the newspaper and see on TV, these things that used to be handled administratively, or the parents would sit down with some other parents and try to resolve this. It's out of their hands today with the consequences that you've seen. Children being so bullied that they commit suicide, and then the children that were committing the acts of bullying are now being charged with manslaughter and terrible charges that affect your life forever. And oftentimes the simple thing of an assault and battery, but someone may get injured so badly that the charges end up being elevated to a felony. And if you think you're going to be helping your child by bringing them in there to resolve this, it's a whole new ball game in our society today, unfortunately. One of the things that you have to be aware of when you do face a suspension, especially for a felony, because if you're charged with a felony and you end up pleading out to a felony, even if it's an admission and it's continued without a finding for 1 year and then gets dismissed, even though you've admitted to the felony, you will be suspended from school indefinitely, probably permanently, depending if it's an incident in the school, especially if it's an incident in the school. But what happens next is the law says once you are a student and you've been admitted to or convicted of a felony, there's no school in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that has to take you. And all of a sudden you have to end up going into a private school setting if your parents can afford it, or you have to find some other way to go about fulfilling your high school career. And what a terrible thing to do by having that one little incident result in your a suspension, especially if you're a freshman or a sophomore, or say you're a senior and you're facing the possibility of having a scholarship taken away because you can no longer play basketball and you're faced a felony conviction. It's a terrible consequence. The law is supposed to change next year that will provide an opportunity for people to appeal and petition to get back into the schools. But right now, a superintendent and a principal can agree that we do not want to have a convicted felon or someone that admitted to a felony being in our school, and typically the process would be you're out.
Yeah, typically they would go along with that. One of the things that is a little bit different in the school environment than you find in our society at large is the ability for someone's locker or backpack to be searched.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit, because it is significantly
The
different.
case law is pretty clear. Now, there's a lesser expectation of privacy in a school setting. And because of the concern for the public safety, in this case, the safety of the children in the school, we now have case law that's established that says that the administrators in the schools can now search the lockers. They don't need probable cause or reasonable and articulable suspicion to believe that a crime is being committed. They only need to search the locker if they believe something's going on. And we all know that there's drugs in some of these high schools, and it can be rampant in some other schools versus other. But it's fair to say that it's pretty much everywhere. And so if you're the type of student that wants to take the risk of putting something in your locker or carrying it into the school with the backpack, you should have a lower expectation of privacy, and you will be searched at some point in time if they think you're an actor, you know, distributing drugs or even just carrying drugs into the school.
Yeah, and the old routine of I'm holding it for my friend probably won't work.
Oh, that never works anymore.
Yeah. What happens if under Massachusetts General Law 37H1/2, someone's charged as a felon?
Yes.
And you talked a little bit about if the incident happened in the school as opposed to out of the school. When you say that, do you mean in the school building, or do you mean on school grounds? What exactly do you mean? What does the law say about that?
The law distinguishes for if it's in a school setting, in the school grounds, or in a school activity. So you could be going to visit the Museum of Science.
Okay, so it doesn't even have to be in the school.
It doesn't have to be in the school. Your basketball team, your football team, or whatever team you're on, cheerleading or whatever, you're in a competition, and let's say the cheerleaders go to Disney World. If you're involved in an incident down there, that's part of a school activity, and you can face the same consequences that anybody else would face if it happened right in the school near your locker.
What type of charges might one expect to face if, and I'm talking again about a student,
Right.
if they make threats to bring a gun to school or something along that line? Now, as I ask you this question, I have in the back of my mind a very recent news item that came up about this girl that was, I think, in either kindergarten or first grade or something along that line, had a plastic toy at home, not even at school,
Yeah.
and were telling her fellow students about it and said something to the effect that we should bring this in, I should bring this in and we could shoot each other with it.
Right.
And they actually suspended her from school. I mean, there is logic has gone out the window as far as I can tell, because
I
it's
agree
either
with
the
you,
law
yes.
that has caused it to go out the window, or it is educators and administrators that are not using their common sense any longer. And I'm not sure what it is, frankly.
It's an interesting thing. I think it's the you're starting to see the shootings that we've had in some of the colleges, and then you had Columbine, and we just got through the 10th anniversary, and then
No
you had
arguments on any of those.
This shooter that had nothing to do with Newtown in the school ends up there, and as a result, people seem to be extremely hypersensitive to the consequences as opposed to letting children be children. You cited the case of this girl having a little toy gun that she may have made out of Play-Doh.
Yep.
But there was a young boy who was 6, 7 years old in a preschool who, out of Legos, made a gun, a small gun with the bright colors, red, green, and white and everything, and was making like he was shooting people. He got suspended. And then there was this other girl, a young girl in junior high school, who had a piece of paper which was a rectangle this way and a rectangle that way, not even the silhouette of a gun. And because she had that in her hand and was mimicking using a gun, she also got suspended for something like that. There's two trains of thought. One is we're trying to be sensitive to people that may have some effect from that behavior. And then there's another train of thought that's saying, can we let children be children? Now, the problem is that we're starting to see, someone who may be bullied, which is a real big problem. And say you're a victim of being bullied and you're sitting down in the cafeteria and someone says to you, what if so-and-so starts to bully you again? And you just say, I'm just going to bring in a gun and shoot him and shoot all the bullies. You've just committed a crime, a felony, actually. And you can be charged with that if a student believes that you're likely to do that. And all of a sudden you're facing the consequences of that. You're getting suspended. The police officer can get involved, conduct the investigation, do the police report, and you're charged at school. It really has lost, I think, its balance, if you ask me.
I think it's gone beyond losing balance.
Yeah.
And boy, I'm a strong believer in protecting students, and I'm a strong believer in taking any serious threat, or even any threat that could possibly be serious, as serious until you prove otherwise. But some of these that you've mentioned, the one I mentioned, which was it was a plastic toy,
Yeah.
still in its packaging, from what I understand, and wasn't even in the school. So I mean, it's kind of like describing it would be enough to get you suspended, and to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Some of the paranoia that you see with this is, if you make a threat to bring a gun to school and it disrupts a school event in any manner, no matter how minor, you can be charged with the same type of crimes that terrorists are charged with in their behavior on an airplane. And it's actually been added into that statute to include airplanes, public places, in schools and school activities. It's thrown in there right at the last paragraph. And it carries with it a 5-year sentence, and it's a superior court jurisdiction, not a district court jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
So the consequences of that are very serious, and I've seen students, children, 15, 16 years old, who have been bullied, said, I'll bring a gun to school and shoot somebody if they're going to bully me again, be charged with that type of crime. And it's just, and because it's a felony, you're out of school.
Right.
And then there's an issue of whether or not you set it as a result of your disability that you may have, which is a whole other issue. But
Yeah.
if you get suspended because of your disability, there are other ways to get around certain things, but you still can't get around being charged with a felony.
Right.
It applies to you with or without a disability.
Right.
Yeah.
Threats to commit a crime, aside from the fact that you're you want to bring a gun into school, other crimes that you threaten to commit.
It could be
What's the outcome of that typically in schools?
the schools clump them all together because of the paranoia. I mean, you might threaten to beat somebody up. You might threaten to steal something. It's all the same thing. They get very afraid of the fact that the end consequence that we've seen in the news is the fear.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody wants to be someone that had some warning of something like that.
And did nothing about it.
And did nothing about
Right.
it. That's the
Right.
big thing for them.
Right.
Especially like if a principal suspends you for your behavior in school, the 37H1/2 provides for an appeal. So you can appeal it to the principal and have a hearing, and that the attorney's allowed to go in there. You can speak for the child, and the parents are allowed. And they'll have, if it's a disability that's an issue, they'll have his IEP or her IEP team there.
Explain what IEP is.
It's an individual education plan.
Right.
And it's designed with their doctors and their teachers and administrators so that the school experience will be positive and it'll be successful, and they're very successful.
Yeah.
But if your behavior is a result of your disability, you can still be suspended. But the interesting thing is that the school is still required to provide tutorial for you
Mm-hmm.
and in a different setting while you're suspended, so that you don't lose your year in school, no matter how long that period of time may be. If it's going to be an extended period of time, they'll provide that the educational opportunity for you to continue on. If it's not part of your disability, then the school's not required to provide any tutoring for you. And if that, the ultimate consequence of that will be is that you could lose a year of school or more if it
Because
takes
no
longer.
other school needs to take you either
Right.
at that point.
Especially if you're charged with a felony.
Right.
The school doesn't have to take you back until it's concluded.
Right.
Yeah.
What about drug distribution? You see a lot of that in the schools today. Drug
Yeah.
distribution, drug possession.
Marijuana is the big drug.
Mhm.
I mean, you can even go on Facebook and you'll see some of these children smoking, having pictures of themselves on their
Early
Facebook.
ages, too.
Yeah, early ages.
Yeah, yeah.
13, 14, 15 years old. It's very disturbing. If you're found in a school to be distributing, handing out, just giving someone a marijuana cigarette or any type of drug at all, that's distribution of a drug, and that's a felony.
Mhm.
And if you do that, the school makes a determination on whether or not you're going to be an individual who's going to be disruptive to the school environment, and it's not going to be a healthy environment for you to be in there. And that the threshold is very low for that. And if they make a determination that you're bad for our school community because you're distributing drugs in our community, you're out.
Mhm.
And the likelihood of you getting back in, the principal will suspend you, probably indefinitely, and then you can appeal it to the superintendent. 3 days after you receive your notice, you can appeal it to the superintendent. And it's not likely that the superintendent is
Yeah.
ever going to overturn the headmaster or the principal's decision to keep you out of the school. So you're pretty much out.
Right, right. The other thing, you mentioned marijuana, but the other types of drugs that students tend to distribute are their own.
Yes.
ADHD drugs, whatever they
Ritalin.
happen to be,
The
Ritalin,
yes.
yeah, I mean, all sorts of them. They make me feel good, so maybe it'll make you feel good because you're not feeling good today.
Right, or you're having trouble
and
with
that's
your
drug
attention.
distribution, whether the parents like to hear that or not, it's the truth. And it can be punishable under our laws, and it's not something you want to live with. So,
No, those are
just-
Class A, Class B, and Class C
and Class E,
narcotics.
even some of them.
narcotics,
Yep,
and
yep.
the fact that you distribute them is a felony.
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the IEP a little bit more, because the IEP is kind of a team approach to your education. In other words, the team is made up of a lot of different professions, including the administration, your parents, teachers, psychologists, social workers, whatever they happen to have in the school.
Yes, it's
the
very-
school
it's very
nurse, and so on and so
comprehensive.
forth. It's a real plan put together for your education, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Very comprehensive.
Okay.
And it has goals that they have expectations for you to achieve at certain levels.
Yep. So when you're in that, you do get a little bit of a bye, so to speak, on some of the issues on a suspension,
Yes.
but it's not without consequence.
No, it's not without consequence.
Okay, because you did mention that earlier, and I want to just make sure people understood that. Brian, again, it's been great that you've been on. We're going to have you back, and while you're president, and even more.
It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, well, we like to have you here too. And if I didn't mention it, your office is in Littleton. I'm not sure if I didn't.
At the
in
Littleton
beginning or
Common.
not. Yep. So he's readily accessible to our audience. I want to thank all of you for watching, and I want to ask you to come back and see us again next time.